Hello again. Welcome back to my studio. It's Jeff Wilson here. Mad Magazine, let's go back into the history of it. First published in 1952 as a magazine by publisher William Gaines and editor Harvey Kurtzman. The mascot was Alfred E. Newman, and his catchphrase was, "What? Me worry?" There was a whole movement right after World War II. There was a concern that morality was on the decline, and things like radio and television and comic books were seen to be demoralizing the youth of our culture. Now, in the 1950s, the baby boomer generation was beginning to become the first youth market that would have an effect on commerce. So this was affecting the whole economic system. And people wanted to get in control of this, get out ahead of it. A gentleman named Frederick Wortham um, wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent, which was filled with some accusations like Wonder Woman was a lesbian, Batman and Robin were gay. Then that was not just in this book; it was popular culture believed that there was a movement afoot from the Russians to demoralize the American public, and people like Joseph McCarthy got involved. There was a bit of a counterculture response. People like Ernie Kovacs did television, which was very groundbreaking. Second City began in Chicago, which was very counterculture. Harvard Lampoon, which was very counterculture. So Mad Magazine definitely fell within this category. They definitely were fighting this kind of, it was basically censorship. Now, before we get into the knockoffs of Mad, Mad was actually kind of a copycat in a way of another magazine, which was popular around the same time, the Harvard Lampoon, which was basically a satire magazine done through Harvard University, and it later became the National Lampoon. I think when they saw what Mad was doing, they kind of jumped on the bandwagon, and I don't know if they made any money, but it certainly was very popular. I remember reading it and enjoying it very much. So the National Lampoon is a little more intellectual, maybe a little more university education audience. But I would say the two magazines were complemented each other very well, and kind of of one got very popular because of the other. I mean, I think Mad Magazine began because of the Harvard Lampoon, but because Mad became very popular, the Harvard Lampoon realized, hey, we can create a National Lampoon, and they did. It pushed the boundaries that the general public considered appropriate and acceptable, and featuring nudity, dialogue that was salty and or lurid, plus satirical attacks on all things sacred and holy. So Mad being very kind of more the youth, National Lampoon being more the intellectual side, the university educated people. So Mad's first real competitor came along in 1958. It was a magazine called Cracked, and Cracked was published by Robert C. Sproul, Robert C. Sproul's Major Publications, and the mascot was Sylvester P. Smythe. And Cracked seemed to really lean on one particular artist named John Severin. John Severin was a disgruntled mad artist who jumped ship, went over to Cracked in late 50s, early 60s, well rendered, very quick looking brush style, and sort of a pen and ink style with always very buxom women. The mascot was Sylvester P. Smythe, who was the janitor at Cracked magazine, and and showed up in a lot of spoofs and stuff. And he was unlike Alfred E. Newman, who never spoke in Mad. Sylvester P. Smythe did have some speaking parts in Cracked. So Cracked did very well. It lasted. I think it's still even maybe running in some form or another. But they had some fun things like the shut ups things. Anyway, so that's Cracked magazine, a very good magazine that did very well. Kind of happy to be number two and not really looking to be number one. Sort of even just kind of taking shots at Mad, if you will, because a lot of the Mad artists, as I say, I think later on. Mad artist Don Martin jumped ship and went to Cracked for a long time and did some Cracked pieces. So certainly happy to be number two, and a number three satire of Mad came out called Sick. And it was first published in 1960 by Crestwood Publications, which was later taken over by Huford Publications in 1968. And in 1976, about almost 8 years later, it was taken over by Carlton Comics, which was the C with the arrow going into the bullseyes. There was Marvel Comics, DC Comics, Dell Comics, and then Carlton. It was like number 3 or number 4, and Gold Key, and all those cheaper brands. A mascot called Huckleberry Fink, who was similar to Alfred E. Newman, very very much so, and kind of had that look to him. And I should say about Alfred E. Newman, had quite a history from where he came from in terms of being a mascot. But Huckleberry Fink's catchphrase, "Why try harder?" Okay, so that takes us to the last of these crazy magazines, put out by Marvel Comics in the early 1970s, going through to the early 1980s, about 10 years. And then it ended. So there you have it. Mad Magazine, Crack Magazine, Sick Magazine, and Crazy Magazine. A lot of fun for a young boy back in the late 50s, 1960s, 70s, and even the 1980s. Jeff Wilson saying goodbye. Thanks for joining me.